With that, let me introduce my friend and neighbor. He lives at the Wessex. He has an incredible studio there. He's a real portrait painter, and he is going to talk about what goes into doing one of these phenomenal portraits. Mark?
Thank you. Well, I had a little trouble getting here. Siri took me all over downtown and to the National Science Center, and then I went back the wrong way, and oh well, I got here. I have been here before, but usually this is when I'm painting. It's my peak painting time is from 11 to 2, and then I have lunch. So, you know, I have come, but I do watch them on YouTube, and I am a big, big fan. I love history and finding out about where I live. I'm not a native, although my relatives did come through here on their way to Texas. A little of my history, I've been doing some genealogical stuff on Ancestry.com, and I'm finding all sorts of interesting stories, and I'm related to Robert the Bruce, the second king of Scotland, and recently I found my 10th great-grandfather was the Golden Knight, whose son was Oliver Cromwell. And I'm a big fan of Wolf Hall. If you've seen any of that or read, I've done both. And I'm glad I wasn't related to Oliver Cromwell. I might be a little meaner, I don't know. And then, so that's the castle down near the River Dee, near the Queen's Place in Scotland. And that's another. The story goes that one of my ancestors had, her husband died in his 40s, and somehow before that, she was able to manage to have 28 children. A lot of twins, apparently, and they do run in the family. I don't have any children, but you know, other people do. Anyway, they had to extend a wing onto the castle to fit some of them in. I am related to Alan Burnett, but my sister, but not the one. Yeah. Anyway, so that, and then on my mother's side, the Crockers and the Wells and the Mowers, she was related to 5 families who were there at the beginning of the Mayflower colony. And I could go on, but I have way too many pictures probably to talk about, so I'll have to talk fast, and then we can take questions later. Or if you just have to, I'll answer them. Okay, and that's my mother. And just as she met my father, she was from Rhode Island and lived on Mount Desert Island. And somehow during World War II, she got stationed as a wave in Denver, basically answering phones, I think. Anyway, and my father, he was from Texas, and that's how they met. And they were about as different as you could be. He was Southern Baptist, she was Episcopalian. Anyway, so I heard a lot of disagreements on how to pronounce words. And I was kind of the peacemaker, trying to, you know, bridge the gaps and all that. Anyway, that's, my father was also, he was an officer in the Air Force. And that was when I was born, and he would do quick little sketches of us. And there I am. I think I can start this. No. Anyway, that's me painting on his portrait of me. with no paint, you know, but I had fun. And that's the portrait he did of me with his hat and the sock puppet. And there I am starting out when I was, I don't know, out of diapers, well, maybe not out of diapers yet. And then I started, you know, I was the firstborn, so I was the hot shot of 4. And there we were stationed in Taiwan, our Formosa, they called it at the time when we were there. And my father, well, that's us, and my mother, well, my father went over ahead of us, and then we flew, my mother with 3 young children under the age of 4, and pregnant with my brother there. Anyway, while he was there, he painted the official portrait of Chiang Kai-shek. And that's a picture of the larger portrait. And there he is painting a portrait of my mother. And that's how it looks in our home now. And then when I was in elementary school, for show and tell, I brought this little sketch he was doing of a mural he was painting for the Officers Club in Missouri. And it's the god of war with a missile and a lightning bolt there. I don't know if you can see the cursor. Maybe I should use, should I use this? Yeah, there's the, anyway. And on the way back from school, I was carrying it, and some of the older boys started picking on me, and they pushed me down into the snow and mud, and I got that into the mud and stuff, and we were able to clean it up all except for right around there. But these are some of my father's, sculptures and things that he did. And there is the portrait. The officers' women, they objected to the nudity. I was a little kid. I didn't know. So my father had to paint a silver flight suit on the guy, or the god, I guess, whatever he was. And then that's a portrait of his parents. And his mother, she came over, she was, I think, well, she had 8 siblings, and they came to Texas in a covered wagon, settled in Comanche County near Brownfield, which is the town that they later established near Lubbock. And her mother's sister wrote a book I brought about their experiences there. And it's really quite funny. She was a really good writer. So was my mother. And that's the homestead and the ranch that they built. And there's my father showing some of his paintings, the one I just showed you, and then a self-portrait, which is right there, as an officer in his dress uniform. And this is his studio in Texas. He and my mother eventually did get divorced, and he married a woman that he dated in college who had never married. And she was the executive secretary for Farrah's Smorgasbord. They had a chain of them, and she never married, but she was quite the dresser and very attractive. And so when he got divorced, he went back to his hometown, moved into the house that he grew up in, and started dating her, and they got married. So that was my stepmother. And he had a big studio in an old kind of a barn structure that they had. He had all sorts of stuff there. And he did, Indian art and Western art and sculptures and murals. And his output, raising 4 children, being a full-time Air Force officer, we moved all over the world. I don't know, I think it was 19 different places in 18 years. And he was stationed with, well, it was always a mystery, but I eventually figured out he was doing something with missiles, and he eventually ended up at Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. And he would tell me he would have to leave at night sometimes to watch for Russians flying overhead and stuff. Anyway, this is my mother's father. He was an Episcopal priest and an organist, and he wrote some hymns for the Episcopal Church. Anyway, he was such a sweet man, and in my college days when I was a little confused about things, he would send me letters regularly, and I wouldn't always respond, but they were very instructive. And he liked to paint in his off time, plein air, outside. So, and my mother liked to make dolls. And she got a lot of publicity when she was at Park Manor here in Nashville. I've never gotten any, really, but I'm actually rather shy, and I like to stay by myself and have clients come to me. And anyway, there were some articles and even some television news programs about her, and she would make these little dolls with Sculpey, and over I think, aluminum ball, tinfoil balls, and then make the bodies and the dresses and all the clothes and everything. And before she died, 8 days short of her 98th birthday, she made 136 of these. She never sold them. People wanted to buy them, but she didn't think they were good enough. But she just had fun doing them. And so she would show them at Park Manor, where she was about, I guess, 14 years. And these are some of them. She had different themes, ethnic groups, different countries, different decades, storybook figures. Anyway, she just had fun doing it. There's Princess Di, I think, in her wedding dress. She did the president's wives in their inaugural gowns and things, and Indians, and there's Bozo the Clown. Sculpey, it's like it's like clay, and then you put it in the oven and it becomes hard. And then she would paint all the little features on and things. And she did that until, about a year before she died, and her hands were getting a little too shaky to do the eyelashes and stuff. But that's in our home. After she died, I got a bunch of them out and put them on our table in the dining room. So, I'm going to be doing this a lot because I get these coughing fits, and it's not contagious. I've had them for about 30 years now. But if I don't talk often, sometimes for days. So this, anyway. If I start coughing and looking like I'm dying of a heart attack, it's nothing serious. There's a portrait of me when I was about 10, painting an Indian chief on horseback, and that's my father's photo that he was using. But I learned how to paint from him, of course, and that's something I did when I was about 15, I guess. And we lived in Europe for 3 years, in Germany, and we would spend a month every year on the summer vacations, from school, living in a different, or traveling in a different part of Germany. And we'd always go to these museums. And I saw this is Madame Pompadour, and it's gigantic. But I was just fascinated by all the detail and the fabrics and the textures. Here's another one by a different artist. And so this is pastel. And here, you would usually see pastels, and you'd think of a pastel painting as very, kind of faint, not dramatic. And anyway, I realized that there were different ways to do pastel, so that's what I started doing. And we moved to Iowa after Germany, and I won the state fair with that pastel. And the colors are way off. I didn't ever get a picture of it until I saw it in a window in a gallery in Estes Park, where I was living at the time. So I did get a picture of it. I should have bought it, but I didn't quite have the money then. Anyway, and I was the art editor for the student newspaper in Iowa, and that's one of my things for the art, for the yearbook. I was very, very straight and kind of reserved. That's my high school senior picture. I turned the right age a few days after school started. I kind of wish they had left me back, because I was always the skinny little kid that didn't quite understand what all the other kids in my grade level were doing and interested in. And then a year later, I would understand. But anyway, when I was in college, I got involved with a group of people, and they were all from very wealthy families, and together we as a side gig, and while we were still in school, we started a little restaurant outside of Boulder, Colorado, where I went to school. And it was in a little farmhouse, and a giant cottonwood tree was next to it. You can barely see. The top of it was much, much further up. Anyway, we served continental cuisine, and it was really good. We even had a harp player, and it was near the IBM plant, so we would have a bus bring them for lunch and stuff, and then it got pretty popular. And so then we also started the Bluebird Bookstore and Cafe in Denver, in the Cherry Creek area, which is kind of like Belmead here or Green Hills in Denver. And I had the bookstore part, and then there was a restaurant also. And one of our cooks actually moved here to Nashville and helped start the Bluebird Cafe with Amy, the owner. And he helped, with the food. And he also played cello and played in the symphony here for a while, and then he moved on. And I did do a drawing of him with his cello, but I don't know. There are a lot of things I don't know where they are anymore. So it was also right next to the Catholic Archdiocese, and a woman who wrote the speeches for the Archbishop would often come to the bookstore, and she'd say, "Well, what's good?" And she would race Porsches in Aspen. She was that kind of woman, very very smart and very attractive. Anyway, she would say, "What's good?" And I would just have a pile of books for her and just give them to her, and then she would read them and then write speeches and stuff for the Archbishop. Anyway, and there's the Bluebird Bookstore Cafe, and it was based on the book by Maurice Maeterlinck about a little boy and girl, and they're at home and they're kind of bored, and there's this old gray bird, and they're in a bird cage, but they want to find the bluebird of happiness, so they have all these adventures, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, and rascally people and stuff, and then eventually get back home safely and look at that bird and find it was there all along, the bluebird of happiness. And that's where all the Bluebird buses and everything come from. And then I studied environmental design, which is what they said that the first they renamed the School of Architecture at Boulder, environmental design, because that was the new thing. And we were right next to the National Atmospheric Center, in Boulder, which has the atomic clock that sets the time and studies the climate and all that. And, they knew from here now, it's been about 100 years that they knew what would happen if we kept polluting the atmosphere with all these greenhouse gases. So I got into that. But they didn't really understand how to teach it, so they would ask us what we wanted to learn, and we thought, I don't know. I don't think anybody actually graduated who actually worked in that field, at least the first year, but it's gotten pretty good. And so with a group of people I was with, I helped design and build some homes in Estes Park, and this was kind of a Swiss chalet up in the mountains on a ridge with an incredible range of, peaks around it and near Estes Park. And it had a two-story interior space with balconies on the inside looking down into it. And it was really cool. It had a hidden panel that you could leave, push a certain way, and then it would open up, and it was kind of a secret escape hatch. And there was a mosaic tub in the master suite that about 4 people could fit in comfortably. Very Roman. Anyway, we had fun building that. Here we are at work. The guy there with his shirt off became the Secretary of State for Colorado eventually. And here we are in the cabin on the Dude Ranch we bought. And it had the largest log cabin in the state at one point, kind of like the one in Yellowstone. Not quite that fancy, but it was big. And so we had a restaurant there, and these are some of the people that were my friends that we did. We were the staff, and I stayed out of the kitchen because I don't do well with heat, and as they say, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. So I did everything else. I was the maitre d', I was the greeter, I washed dishes, I cleaned toilets, whatever else was needed. We all did that. And basically we all worked 2 full-time jobs or, 1 full-time and then went to school. Back then, I was getting by on like 4 hours of sleep at night for about 10 years, and finally started hallucinating and stuff, and light hurt my eyes and things. I realized I can't do this anymore, So we all kind of dispersed and sold everything, and he was with the CIA as a code breaker, and I think he was kind of implanted in our group as a spy. And he smoked constantly. I never figured out what happened to him eventually, and then I moved to Denver, and friends of friends. Well, I was running the bookstore, and I was handling the Rajneesh books. He was the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, and he had all those Rolls Royces and a ranch in Oregon, and we carried some of his books. It was a spiritual bookstore, but no black magic, and so a couple came and they said, we want to be the distributor of his books for North and South America, get them from India. Can you help us do that? And so I did. And then later I moved in with them, and it was fun, but they said, well, we have some friends from Nashville, and they're going to Breckenridge with an extended family, and they need another driver for one of the cars. So would you want to help? Drive them up there, and you can stay, and they'll pay for everything. And I thought, sure. So I did. And this is one of the women, and she had been a ballet dancer, and her mother, they started a bed and breakfast, and then they started the first kindergarten in Nashville. And then she married Jack Miller, who had the Miller Medical Clinics. His father did. And he was a bone surgeon, basically. And she was the first Southern belle I'd ever met. And I was smitten. I didn't realize that she was actually old enough to be my mother. She never looked like that, But she was quite glamorous, and this was at her memorial service. She died a couple of years ago, but she was living in Wessex Towers also. And I had several friends living there, so eventually we moved there. And this is in the UPS store in Belmead. And if you go all the way back, this is the society page about their wedding. And there she is, teaching her ballet students. And her daughter became a ballerina also, but also, and danced, and they both did in New York City. Anyway, Annie, let's see, Annie Miller, Beauregard, boy, 73 names are starting to, I've got too much in there now. Anyway, she and Jack were married, and then this scoundrel came to town. He had been an executive, and decided he wanted to be a country star. And he looked like Rhett Butler. He had the mustache, the hair, everything. And he was quite the charmer with the women. And he wanted to be a country star so he could get lots of women. And basically, he started getting in with the music people, and they said, well, we're starting this new show called Hee Haw, and we need a comedy writer. Can you write jokes? And he said, sure. And they said, okay, we need 50 by tomorrow morning. And he did it. He was very creative. And so somehow they fell in love, and she, left Jack and married. Anyway, it was kind of a mess. Annie said, well, if you're ever in Nashville, come by and, stay with us. And I thought, why would I ever go to Nashville? I mean, it's like hee-haw, right? And I had never lived in the South. And I did, on my way to Florida for the winter, stop and stay with them. And they took me up to the Grand Ole Opry. We sat on stage, and they took me to the Loveless Cafe and introduced me to all these people. And I thought, boy, this is a great place. And I also felt like I had lived here maybe in a past life or something. It was that strong. and I met Mrs. Frank Liu, whose husband started the Nashville Life and Casualty Company and the Grand Ole Opry. And so she, I started drawing people. I didn't know what I was going to do here. And so I did her sketches of 9 of her grandchildren. And they had the house on Abbott Martin that, Abbotsford is now built around. That was all their property. And they had some incredible portraits there. So hopefully I can keep this up. Then she had me display some of my things, and I had just really started out doing pastels and colored pencil and drawings at the Liu Gallery that she donated to the Belmont University. So that was my first show, and then I got commissions from there, and it just took off. Oh, that's Annie as a ballerina. She and her husband Jack also had a son who had some sort of disability. I'm not sure if he was autistic or what, but they were going to United Methodist Church. And so he was on the vestry, and she said, we need a school for our son. And, you should tell them that. And so he said, we need to start a school. And so they started Curry Ingram there first at the church, and then later, Kim's not here. He knows a lot about some of these things. Anyway, this is one of the first drawings I did, and it was selected in a national competition, and it was one of the 100 finalists, and that's Jackson Ray, who's a doctor now and works in sports medicine. No, I'm sorry, I'm the wrong kid. A lot of them grew up to be interesting things. No, he's my pulmonologist. Right. Anyway, he was such a beautiful boy. I saw him playing soccer with all these other little kids, and how am I doing? Oh, boy. So I just told his parents that I wanted to do a drawing of him, and so they let me. And there I am kind of starting out here in Nashville, and it was all basically from scratch, but I just quickly, that's a picture my father took, and he was always into cameras and taking pictures of, I'm glad he did now, but when you're growing up, somebody always saying, pose, and so, and then when we'd have to paint for one of his or to pose for one of his paintings, some of the lights he used, they were really big, they were very hot, and you have to sit there and you go, oh. So I'm sympathetic when people are posing for me, and I try and keep them much more comfortable. Anyway, these are some of the, her father was an obstetrician, Dr. Lovern, and he delivered a lot of the kids that I painted. And they were one of my first patrons, and they got me a lot of work. And then I met, I think it was in a fundraiser for one of the schools here, the private schools. Anyway, this was the Sundius family. He had been a rocket scientist, and then got, they kind of disbanded. And so he invented the thing that you pull to open the laundry box of soap, and made a fortune. So they had a nice collection of art and a sculpture gallery and a house on their own private little lake next to the Hooker horse ranch. Anyway, so there I'm doing their son's portrait. He was a swimmer who had raised a lot of money for charities, and he became an architect. Come on. There he is. So that was fun, and I got all these gourmet meals, and boy, were they into wine. So I painted this picture of them. It's, all these are pretty much life-size. And that wine was like 1,500, maybe 15,000 a case, and you had to let it age for 10 years. And this was the last of 2 remaining bottles. And so, and he wanted me to make sure that I got the legs on the wine glasses, and when we finished the portrait, they had the second bottle, And I was at the head of a long table, and they all toasted me, and I got to drink some, and boy, did I get just that little bit. And whoa! Anyway, but that was their private lake. And then I did one of their daughters. I've done multiple generations of several families. So that was, and this was at the waterfall at the entrance to the Governor's Club. And they had the water turned off so she could get up there. And then after she left, they started the water again. And anyway, I kind of made up the water, and there they are in California where they've eventually moved. And they knew how to live life to the fullest. And this is one I did at Cheekwood, and they had their interior decorator bring all this stuff to set up. And I rearranged a lot of it in the painting, but and moved some things around in the painting. But that was fun. And this Bob Buchanan, Mrs. Ferris, Mrs. Ferris, Frank Ferris's wife.
I'm sorry, did you say Surratt?
Ferris. Ferris. Ferris Warfield in Canada. Can you hear me well enough? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay.
It looked like Ms. Frank Ferris.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Very pretty lady.
And they kind of adopted me, and I would go as a single guy to their home, and for the holidays, and I would sit on their box seat they started the steeplechase, and they were right on the finish line in the first box, and so I'd sit with them. And their daughter was schizophrenic, and so I befriended her, and she was able to function better with me than anybody else. I guess I have that effect on people. And so I would take her to Opryland and movies and stuff, but then the voices and things would start telling her that everybody was talking about her, and we'd have to leave halfway. So I never got to see the conclusion of a lot of the movies. But
I was a law partner of Genevieve's husband.
Right.
Jeannie's father.
Yeah, and I just love them. So then I, through the Loverns, I got, she called me one day and said, well, this woman will call you, and she'll say she's Mrs. Dudney. Well, she's actually Barbara Mandrell, so you should know. And I knew who that was because I'd seen her on TV. And so I got to watch Kim, and Tuck and Hinton design and build this. I first met her when they were living on the lake, and it's a 33,000 square foot log cabin, a fontanelle, and she was just so gracious with me, and she would fix me sandwiches for lunch and stuff, and I would paint out there, and I would that's her daughter, and we brought things into the bedroom to arrange her bedroom, and arrange that. And then she had her hairdresser fly out from California to do her hair, which was a lot of fun well, this is a pastel, but it's 4 feet by 3 feet. And that cat did not like to be held. They finally got rid of it. It's a Himalayan, and so they had a ceramic cat about the same size. And so she would hold that to pose. There it is in a frame I had made for it. Mahogany tipped in gold. And that's her son. She wouldn't allow him to go out and pretend to hunt with any bullets. And she also, in the portrait, wanted the shotgun cocked. So even without anything in it, I wouldn't, it wouldn't be a threatening picture. And that old dog, Boomer, oh, he was perfect. He would just sit there. And then I did her father, Barbara's husband, was a pilot for 5 governors here. That's why I don't do public speaking. Anyway, I got to paint Dad's helicopter in the background there. And that's kind of the progress of it. And that's him posing in my studio in Brentwood. And he was really good, but he kept saying, "Mr. Mark, what's that color?" And, you know, I don't name them. I go by the numbers, you know, because now I have over 5,000 different colors in pastel and over 100, you know, in oil. But he kept doing that, and he leant forward in that chair, and it started tipping towards those pencils, very sharp. And I had to reach over and grab them. That would have been the end of my career. Anyway, and that's the beginning of it. And there it is in the dining room with Barbara and me and little Nathan. He was a neat kid. And that's a signal, you know, that you're ready to take off the flight deck on the carrier. And that's their dining room. And that you can get an idea of the size of the dining room. They had stuff all over the place. It was like a ski lodge or I don't know, it was a resort place, 150 acres. And she was nice enough to write that for me. And anyway, that's John Rochford. He developed the Green Hills Mall and a lot of things in Nashville and elsewhere. So I did that in his office. And then I did his two children, pastel as well. And then I did his wife eventually, but she didn't think she was pretty. And like her mother, never wanted to be in any pictures. But they did find a few in their photo album, and it was going to be a surprise because she would not have ever done it herself. But, you know, I was able to rig that together, and she did like it, and she did finally pose for me. But I had done that for her mother after her mother died, and her father, his wife had died, and he was starting to forget what she looked like. And there were no pictures of her, but there were these group photos with a little tiny face of her. But they, you know, Carol said that she looked like her mother, so I used Carol as the model, which she would do for that. And when her father saw the portrait, he just burst out crying. He was just so moved. I love doing that, special things. She had her ballet slippers on, and then I did this, and you know, they just said, "Well, how about the red sailboat?" And boy, it worked. But while he was sitting there posing, he was an impulsive little boy, he stuck the mast right up his nose, way up there, and it went, and I thought, whoa, I didn't know noses could do that. Anyway, that won first place in an international competition, first pastel to ever do that. And I'm forever known as you did the red sail, you know. Anyway, so that's a close-up of it. And that's, you know, when I got the prize from John Howard Sandon. And this is what, there was a guy in the audience, and he looked like the giant in Harry Potter with the big long beard, and he was really big. But every time he would see me after they showed that, he would just bow to me, and I go, what? You know, and he had taped, you know, with a little cassette recorder what they said. John said that about the portrait when he saw it, and so I won first place, and that was a really big deal. And there I am with one of my mentors, Everett Raymond Kinsler. He was telling me a joke. He was really funny. And then this one I did completely from life. And he was, well, I won't go into their story, but it was like a soap opera. But they had authentic Victorian furniture, and they wanted, so I moved it all in the studio, built a model stand, and painted the backdrop and everything, and hung everything, and that took months. This is Emily and Mark Eberle's daughter, Catherine. She was a prodigy with the violin, and they commissioned a famous composer to write a violin concerto for her that she played with the Nashville Symphony. And it was incredibly complicated while she was still in high school. Now she's the and that's a painting by somebody else in the background, which they had never really liked. So they said, can you put that in the background and maybe improve it a little? So I did. And then they called a couple of years later and they said, you know, it makes it look too busy. Can you paint that out? And so they paid me again to undo it, which is a better composition. And now she's the assistant concertmaster for the Utah Symphony and the concertmaster for the Hollywood Bowl. And just an incredible player. And those are her parents. There's her father and mother, and I'm not sure who else. And he was the soloist, I guess, or something. And that she's recently married, finally. She was very busy, and that's the whole family. And her mother I did a portrait of also. I did all of them. That's the drawing for it. And then that's the painting. After a while, a few years, she said, you know, now I'm a blonde. Can you change the painting? I said, well, if you want me on retainer, I can do that every time you change your hair. And she didn't do that, but you know, I like, and she's a ballroom dancer now. And that's still her I don't know how old she is now, older than me, I think. And she goes all around the world and wins these in her age group ballroom. And she has some of the coaches from the Dancing with the Stars as her tutors. So she's quite elegant and has incredible, that's in their home near the governor's mansion. And they added an addition that was twice the size of the original mansion and attached it, you know. Anyway, that's the father and son. And I thought that was, you know, fathers are often absent and you hardly ever see them, I don't know, maybe here they do, but show much affection, especially to their boy childs. And I just thought that was so cool. And he's a sportscaster now, I think. And he recently got married, and that's their first child. And there's that painting again. I didn't mean to put that in there, but that's the same girl now. And she became executive secretary to the head of Chevron Oil. And then she, and some other things like that. And she's had such a glamorous life. She's, you know, I see her on camels and stuff in the desert in Egypt or wherever. And now recently she was the head of the prayer group that meets in the federal, you know, Washington, D.C. Capitol. She was also voted the hottest intern one year. But she was a very good girl, you know. And her brother's a hot gun fighter pilot and stuff. And this is one, Ann Kesley. Oh, I just loved her. She did not think she was pretty, but she wanted to make something to give to her husband for Christmas, and it was a surprise. So she squirreled away some rental money they had on some property and gave me a little money, you know, every month. And then Christmas Eve, he was up putting the kids to bed or giving them a bath upstairs, and we switched the daughter's portrait that I'd already done with hers. And so when he came down Christmas morning, there was his present. She said he just started crying. He was so moved. And for days, she couldn't find him, and she'd find him standing in front of the painting, you know, just staring at it. And that's a pastel, too. And that she designed that dress. And this is my mother's interpretation of one of my paintings with, these are my sisters that she substituted for them. And that's the painting I did for Jim Ed Norman, who was president of Warner Brothers and has had quite the career. And he was the band leader recently for the Eagles tour, but he's still producing the list of people and his hits and everything. It's just incredible. So he was one of the first music people I started doing. And, you know, from this position, this is at Cheekwood Park, you could see where I live now, Wessex Towers. I didn't know it at the time, but it's funny how things come around. And that's his wife. And, you know, I tried my best to get her beauty, but, oh, she was such a beautiful woman and so smart. They called her Kim Ed instead of her, you know, Kim Norman, but they called her Kim Ed because she was kind of his right-hand person, his wife. And that's Jim Ed. And they had a house in Maui, too, and they wanted me to go out there and paint them all as a group overlooking the ocean, you know, in their backyard where they lived and all that. It never happened, though. I did this study of him first, and I just, you know, I'm such a perfectionist, I just way overdid it. And he said, well, that'll do. And I thought, oh, no trip to Maui? But I wasn't sure how I was going to pull that off. Anyway, and there they are. And then this is one I did. They had I think a beer distributorship here, and that was in their backyard, and I did him too. Anyway, I did Bill Purcell, not the mayor, but the composer, and he taught composition at Belmont until he was 91. And he was on 600 albums as a, you know, session player from, you know, Patsy Cline and Ring of Fire and all these other big hits. But he also played the piano, and he could do anything on that piano. He was classically trained, and he would, I better not go on too much, I'm way over. That's one of his grandchildren I did. I'm gonna have to go much faster. And another one, and then this one, she arrived at my studio straight from a semester in Spain, and she had a backpack and was wearing that and some jeans, and then she pulled out, I said, well, what's in the backpack? And she pulled out this gold scarf, and so we rigged that up. And I think it looks a little Spanish. I added the black background. And that's pastel too. Come on, oh no, there we go. Oh, to hear his playing, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Anyway, you could hear him play. Every New Year's Eve, he had a party. Oh, he lived down the street from the governor's mansion too. And his daughter there is a jazz singer, and she's also a really good ice skater. She trains with Scott Hamilton. Anyway, that's the paintings that I did for them in their home. And I did Waylon Holyfield, and he was the first president songwriter of ASCAP, and he went to the Capitol and passed some legislation that protected copyrights for musicians and artists, but a neat guy, and so I did he and his wife. He wrote the state song for Arkansas, and she was Miss Arkansas, and he wrote a lot of big hits, and that's one of his boys, and another one. That dog was also pretty mean and liked to bite people, and and there I'm working on the daughter. My chair is right next to the edge of the swimming pool, and that's what I did. And then I did Harry Jacobson. He was the vice chancellor in charge of the medical part of Vanderbilt, and on the board of I don't know how many organizations, and he had 40, I don't know, clinics, and their house was, I don't know, 20-something thousand square feet, and just for the two of them. His closet was like a men's store. I couldn't believe how organized and everything. Anyway, so I only had an hour to photograph him because he was that busy, and he was very, businesslike. And I said, can you warm up a little? And he said, honey, come over here, make me happy. And she just came over and put her hand on his shoulder, and he just melted, and that's how he looked. So I took a bunch of pictures and worked from those. And then, anyway, that's what it looks like in the house. And this little boy, I did early, but all those stripes, I was getting hallucinations, like pop art. But he became an artist and does landscapes, and he's done really, really well. I just love his work, Michael Griffin. And I did this little boy in his Lord Fauntleroy suit. And he became a rock. He played in Maggie Rogers' band recently, and a lot of bands, and he's a multi-instrumentalist and a music producer himself and lives in California. And then I did these two for Jackie Carr, and she got me a bunch of commissions with her relatives. And Morgan is a famous singer-songwriter, kind of a rock star now, and had a song in the Olympics and stuff. He's all over the place. But he was very hyperactive. He just can't stop moving. And he was on a model stand, and he started telling me about Ninja Turtles and stuff. And he fell off and hit his head on the coffee table edge. And his mother came in and she said, "Oh, he does that all the time." So I wasn't in trouble. And then her son, he's in finance, and you can tell he's a lot more organized with his Legos. And he never really played with them, but he did manage to get that little plane together. So then one of her relatives, they were the Wheel brothers of Montgomery. So I went down there and painted the children on their private lake. Come on. Come on. What have I done? We're over. Yeah. Oh, I have so many more to show. I'm sorry. I've done hundreds, and trying to distill 42. Oh, it's taken me forever. And anyway, you can see more on my webpage, and I've got books up here of some of the people that I talked about. The one in the middle is the one of my great-grandmother, her sister that wrote. And then to get a little political, one of Bob's, the last one we had on Bob Buchanan's relative, that's a book about him, a little different point of view on what's happening now politically. And I'm interested in a lot of things, politics and philosophy and religion, and I have thousands of books, and I just, that's why I can stay at home and be happy and never get lonely. And then that last book is a book I recommend about the world we could be building if we were doing things right environmentally. And it could be so much better, and we already have lots of solutions that already exist. And it's the best book I've read on that subject. And maybe the timer just went off and it stopped. Okay, questions?
What did your father do with all of his works when y'all were moving around every year?
Yeah, the Air Force paid for the moving. Oh yeah, it was amazing. Well, at one point, I guess when we went to Germany, his sister married a guy who was the Secretary of State for Oklahoma, and they had a big hotel on the lake, and they put him up in the attic, a lot of the stuff, and all their records were destroyed by a leak in the roof. All the covers were, but some of the paintings have survived. But when he died, a lot of the relatives took those, and I took some. I've got some at home. I wish you could see this. There was so much more to do. I could probably bore you for hours.
What was your training besides your father?
Well, I studied at the Florence Academy of Art and several masters, and I've always read and studied, and I'm still discovering all sorts of new things. And now you can see stuff on YouTube and of artists from all over the world. I've never really done any of that sort of. I'm not very socially active. I do watch Facebook, though. Anyway, yeah, Jeff.
I've got two questions.
Okay.
One is, other than that, studying at the Florence School of Art that you talked about, other than your father being a model for portrait painting, did he actually spend time educating you and teaching you? That's the first question.
Uh-huh.
The second question is, it seems like in terms of your fascinating history, that you painted as a young person, but then stopped and did all these other things, and then didn't start portrait painting again until you got here in Nashville.
Yeah, well, I did some architectural drawing and a few other things while I was doing all that. With the rest, we had 2 restaurants and a bookstore cafe, all at the same time, and managed to do that in Estes Park in Denver. Yeah, my father would teach little art classes, and I would sit on those and be, pretty bored, but I would learn. And he would, have me painting alongside him and stuff. But I never actually thought you could make a living as an artist, because he had to have a career in the military to support the family of 4. And so, I didn't really consider that as a viable option, and I thought, well, I'll do buildings. I read Atlas Shrugged and things like that and thought, oh, yeah. Anyway, I have managed for all this time.
Mom, what time, or how much time do you put into portraits?
It's not like that guy on TV with the happy little clouds, in a half an hour. No, all the planning, and I get to know the people. I ask for any pictures of them from when they were a baby all the way through, so I can see how their faces developed and changed and how they may someday be. And I really try and get to know them and understand what their values and interests are and their point of view. That's one thing I really wanted to get across. Growing up in the military, I often didn't see what regular people did for a living. So now I'm just totally fascinated about all the different ways people do things. And I try and do it without judgment, and I try and see them as God might, with love, because we're all God's children, and that's very important. And I try and find out. I was just getting going onto some of the biggest people I've done. An executive with all these factories around the world, and I could go on and on about them, but they were high school sweethearts, and that's what I wanted to capture. And when I'd see them, they were often holding hands, so that's what I captured. But he was knighted and all that for all his factories. Anyway, and then I did a full-length portrait. I don't know why this is not doing anything. Of a panther, and it's 60 inches by 40 inches. And, this executive secretary called me and said, he wants a picture of a panther. And I thought, well, is it the mascot or, of his sports team or whatever? No, it was the panther that the Greek god Dionysius would ride around on. And there's a picture of it in that book of my work. And so I studied panthers, and it was a leopard, and looked up what kinds of leopards would be in Greece at the time, and did a Google Earth view of where the mountains were and where the light would come. And the myth goes that Dionysus, better known as Bacchus, would jump on his back and ride around and create, and eat people and stuff. He was a demigod. His mother was mortal, but his father was Zeus. And he was kind of a precursor to Christ. He was torn apart, and by the god who was jealous, the god's wife actually, and then Zeus put a piece of him in his thigh, and grew him back into a little baby, and then he was reborn. There's a lot of stuff. I really get into things like this. It's so much fun.
I was just quite moved by your presentation in that it did seem like you really did get to know your subjects and that they really appreciated not only your work but the relationship. And it seemed like one kind of encounter led to another, and that was part of your almost a destiny that you ended here and then you were there, and these people are all a part of this journey.
I feel like I've got a very good guardian angel that's taken very good care of me. Yes, yeah. And I'm not very well adapted to the heat here, but I'm so glad you guys have air conditioning. We do now. I don't know how you did it before. Anyway, that's part of my story anyway.
Thank you
To be
very much.
continued.